When a person makes a decision about you, you can usually ask why. You can sit across a desk. You can hear a reason. You can disagree with the reason. You can take that disagreement to someone else. That is not a courtesy. It is how most institutions stay bearable. Now imagine the same decision arriving with no person attached to it. A score, a flag, a yes or a no, delivered as if it had always been true. You ask why. What comes back is a sentence that sounds like an explanation and is not one. This episode is about that gap, not about whether the machine is accurate, about what happens to you when a decision is hard to contest. Because that is already how a lot of ordinary decisions get made. Hiring screens, loan files, a post taken down, a claim delayed, a shift not offered, a shortlist you never see. In each case, the work looks the same from the outside. Something went in, a result came out, somebody acted on it. The difference is what you can do next. A human decision, even a bad one, has a shape you can push against. There is a person who can change their mind, or at least be asked to stand behind what they did. A model output does not have that shape. It arrives finished. And it arrives looking objective, which is the part that does the real damage. A number looks like a measurement. A ranking looks like an order that was already there in the world, waiting to be read off. Neither of those things is necessarily true. The model produces a pattern match. It is very good at producing pattern matches. That is the whole method. A pattern match can be useful. It can also be a polished version of whatever was in the training material, including the parts nobody would defend out loud. But it does not arrive labeled as a guess. It arrives labeled as a result. That is why arguing with it feels different from arguing with a colleague. A colleague can be tired, biased, lazy, or having a bad week. You know those failure modes. You have language for them. You have a path around them. The model does not get tired. It does not look embarrassed. It does not say, "Let me think about that." It also does not own the outcome. So the conversation you want to have has nowhere to go. This is already familiar if you have ever tried to reverse a decision that the system made. You send a message. You get a reply that restates the rule. You ask again. You get a slightly longer restatement. If you are lucky, a person eventually appears. If you are unlucky, that person has no more authority than you do because the decision was not really theirs either. The human in the loop is often not in the loop. They are at the end of it with a button. Their job is to confirm what already happened. Confirming is not the same as judging. And confirming, done a few hundred times a day, becomes a habit of trusting the screen. That is not a moral failing. It is what the job is designed to produce. Now where this actually sits. Organizations started using models for decisions because the old way did not scale. There were more applications than readers, more claims than reviewers, more posts than moderators. The promise was consistency. The same case would get the same treatment at any hour without a queue. Some of that promise is real. A tired person at the end of a shift is a genuine source of error. A model does not have a shift. The problem is that consistency is not the same thing as being able to argue. You can be consistently wrong and still be very hard to move. And the same treatment only means the same treatment according to the pattern the model learned. If that pattern quietly encodes who used to get the loan, who used to get the interview, who used to get believed, then the machine will reproduce that pattern at industrial speed with a calm that looks like fairness. It will not announce that this is what it is doing. Here is a concrete picture, because the abstract version is too easy to nod at. Somebody applies. The file is scored. The score is below a line. The line was chosen because it processed yesterday's pile at an acceptable rate. Nobody in the room can tell you, in a way that would survive a serious question, why this particular file fell below it. They can tell you the score, they can show you a chart, they can name the supplier. That is not why. Why would be a reason that could be wrong. A score is not a reason, it is an output. This is the distinction that gets lost in the language around these systems. You will hear that the model is transparent because it can generate a paragraph about its own decision. That paragraph is another generation. It is produced the same way the original answer was produced, by predicting plausible text. It is not a window into the process. It is a story written after the result already exists. Sometimes that story happens to be useful. Sometimes it is a fluent excuse. You cannot tell which from the tone. The tone is always confident. That is the method again. So when you ask the machine to explain itself, you are not getting the thing you would get from a person. You are getting a second output about the first output. If you use that as the basis of an appeal, you are appealing to the same kind of object that made the decision. This is why the complaint process so often feels like a maze with one door. You fill in a form. The form is read by something like the thing you are complaining about, or it is read by a person whose dashboard already shows the original score, sitting there like a fact. Reversals happen. They happen less often than the volume of complaints would suggest they should, and they happen for reasons that are hard to inspect. Now the question of who is responsible when it is wrong. This is the part institutions like least, which is a useful signal. If a person denied you, you know who to name. Their name is on the letter or on the door or in the meeting. If a model denied you, the names multiply and then vanish. The supplier will say they sold a tool. The company will say they followed the tool. The operator will say they only clicked what the screen recommended. Each of those sentences can be true at the same time and still leave you with nobody who will stand behind the actual decision. That is not an accident of implementation. It is a property of putting the decision in a place where no single person has to originate it. The colleague you cannot argue with is attractive for exactly this reason. It does not take offense. It does not leak. It does not remember that you complained last time. It also cannot be sat down and asked to account for a pattern in its own work. A manager can be asked why this team keeps rejecting a certain kind of file. A model can be measured. Measurement is not the same as an account. You can publish a report. You can show that two groups have similar scores on average. Averages do not help the person whose file was the exception the model was sure about. And the model is always sure. That is worth saying again, because it is the mechanism, not a personality trait. There is no separate control for I am guessing. There is a next word and then another. Which is why a wrong refusal and a right refusal can look identical from the outside. Same layout, same language, same small box with a result in it. Your ability to tell them apart is not improved by making the box prettier. So what actually changes once you see this clearly? First, you stop treating the output as a finding. It is a suggestion with a lot of institutional weight behind it. Those are not the same thing, even when the screen makes them look the same. Second, you look for whether a decision can be reversed by a person who is allowed to disagree. If the person in the loop cannot override the score without filing a report about themselves, they are not in the loop. They are decoration. Third, you notice where the organization has quietly moved from the model helps to the model decided. The language shift is small. The legal and moral shift is not. Helping means a person still has to originate the call. Deciding means the call already happened, and the person is there to make the paperwork match. A lot of workplaces are in the second state, while still using the vocabulary of the first. That is the honest situation, and it is more useful than a panic about machines in charge. Most of these systems are not in charge. They are in the way. They sit between you and the person who used to have to look at you and say no. Removing that moment is efficient. It is also how you get a kind of authority that does not answer. Now the honest fence, because there is a real case on the other side and it deserves stating properly. People are inconsistent. They favor people who resemble them. They get tired. They take shortcuts late in the day. They hold grudges. A model can be better than that, in the narrow sense of repeating itself. If the alternative is a chaotic human process with no record, a recorded model process can be an improvement. You can at least measure it. You can at least find the pattern. That is not nothing. It is why these tools spread, and it is not merely cynicism. The mistake is to treat that improvement as the end of the argument. Being more consistent than a tired person does not make a decision contestable. It does not tell you who owns it. It does not turn a generated paragraph into a reason. Those are separate problems, and they do not get solved by making the model more accurate. Accuracy is about how often the output matches some target. Contestability is about whether a person can push back, be heard, and change the outcome. You can have a very accurate system that nobody can argue with. That is a particular kind of power, and it does not announce itself as power. It announces itself as a result. Which brings it back to the desk. The next time a decision arrives with no person attached to it, the useful question is not whether the model is clever. The useful question is, if this is wrong, who can I sit down with and can they actually change it? If the answer is a form that returns you to the same output, you are not dealing with a colleague. You are dealing with a closed door that learned how to talk.